All right, welcome to IT Trendsetters. This is episode 6. We're talking about project management, but more specifically, the secret sauce in bringing together IT strategy, program, and project management when aligning and operationalizing your information security program. So, as always, we have some very smart people from SynerComm. These are different faces than you've seen in the past, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We have Mark and Ron from SynerComm. Mark, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. After that nice long title, I'll try to be brief. So my name is Mark Spent. I'm the Vice President of Service Delivery for SynerComm. Uh, Between motorcycle rides and time with family and friends, sometimes even during those, I do all that I can across the variety of products and services to help our customers improve in whatever areas they might need help in.
Great. And Ron, I am not going to butcher your last name, so I'm going to let you tell the audience how to say it.
I'm Ron Gustafson. I'm the managing consultant at SynerComm, and I have primary responsibilities for our program and project management services. Outside of the office, my interests include classic cars, a lot of boating, and a lot of traveling. From a career perspective, I spent many years in telecommunications with a focus on developing engineering operations, service delivery teams for both regional and nationwide service providers.
Great. Well, let's dive right into this. I know I was reading some articles about your Implement IT service. I saw some out there, some periodical picked it up, and I thought it was interesting. But let's start at a high level. We're talking about gluing together the strategy, the program, and project management, and why is that important? So, Mark, can you kick us off here?
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris, thanks for having us here. It's great to be talking with everyone and on one of our IT trendsetters. I think the question is extremely appropriate. You started with why. Why is it important to blend strategy, program, and project management together? We'll talk throughout, I'm sure, today a little bit about some of the hows and the whats, but where it comes together might be best described by example. We work with customers across a number of different disciplines, of course, and very often it involves security or some larger project that they might be deploying or operating. And as we work with different levels in the organization, the executive leadership team, as we work with maybe managers and directors, or we work with the staff that might be operating or executing on whatever it is for that particular customer, what we find is that everybody is sure they're doing a great job. And everybody is believes everyone else is doing a great job too. And sometimes they're right. More times maybe than not, we find that not everybody really understands what everyone else is doing. And where that almost always comes back to us, it comes back in other ways, but when these events occur, we get a phone call quickly. It's when there's a breach, there's some issue in an organization. If it's a security program and there's not good alignment in that program from your strategy all the way through your tactics, your project management in the middle, making sure the project management is balancing and blending the understanding of what everyone is doing, that's where issues come up. And when they do, there's always surprise. So we've gone into customers that they'll call us, we'll come in with some quick assessment, some quick analysis of what's happening. And after we get over the initial challenges of the incident or the breach, whatever might have occurred, that's when we will typically stick around and we'll start to understand and unwind how could that have happened in the first place. That's where we'll do some modeling with the customer. We'll help them visualize what is the left hand doing that the right hand is not aware of, and vice versa. What does the head want, but the feet maybe aren't taking us in that direction? We'll model that using spreadsheets. Sometimes we'll visualize with tools. Sometimes they're just tabletop exercises and whiteboarding sessions. And we'll identify where there are some pretty significant gaps in understanding and strategy. So it's those opportunities then where we can come in and help qualify. We can help to identify the gaps. We can help that customer to turn those into something that's more of a actionable, tangible strategy, something that can be quantified, something that can be qualified, something that can be presented upstream as well as downstream, that can get the organization better aligned. When we go to execute that, 9 times out of 10, that's where our program and project management services are engaged.
So, Ron, can we talk a little bit more specific about the tools? I mean, Mark is mentioning spreadsheets and Microsoft Project. I think he mentioned there, but can we get a layer deeper there?
Sure. So a lot of our core tools, I'll call them, we spent a lot of time in SharePoint, Microsoft Project, obviously, as we're dealing with project management. Power BI is a very important tool, very powerful tool that we use, Replicon, and a little bit of Excel. And if we combine all of those together, you look at SharePoint, that's the primary tool that we use for things such as file management, data collection and management, when you're talking about critical components of project management, tracking milestones, decisions, jeopardies, issues, risks, gaps, all of that we use for in SharePoint. A lot of our critical tracking as well as dashboards. We give, in certain unique cases where customers want access to SharePoint, we consolidate the data, make it very easy for them to track statuses, and maybe it's equipment deliveries or install schedules. That's all easy to do and to present in dashboards. Microsoft Project, that is our primary project management tool when it comes to task management, scheduling, resource identification management, all right there in Microsoft Project. Power BI, very, very important, very critical to our reporting process. It provides very detailed texting, data management, as well as even graphical representation for what I'll call kind of executive summary, executive level reporting, right down to our day-to-day project status and project management. Replicon may not be as commonly known of a tool. That's the tool that we use for all of our time tracking. So when it comes time for the financial reporting and you're tracking costs and you're tracking resource and hours for various different elements or phases with the project, that's where Replicon comes in. And then we've got Excel. That's kind of the catch-all tool. If something doesn't fit into one of the other core tools, odds are it fits into when we're talking financial analysis, resource forecasting, a lot of that fits very well into Excel. So in addition to a lot of those tools, we've spent a lot of time with integration and the automation of those tools. You know, you might think that, okay, you've got these 4, 5, 6 tools, you've got a lot of duplicate data entry and management to keep things tied together and linked between those different systems. And what we've done is you can take a look at SharePoint as we go from customer to customer or project engagement. We've got a series of templates, if you want to call them that, or predefined pages that right out of the box are automatically set up. We have the same with our project plans, our resource forecasting, as well as the executive level or monthly reporting that we use in Power BI. And the nice thing is all of those tools play very well together through integration. A lot of the data that we collect and manage in SharePoint is very easily opened and manipulated in Microsoft Project and syncs up between SharePoint tasks as well as Microsoft Project. It's wherever one's preference, whatever you're most comfortable with. Then you've got Power BI. Power BI is probably the most integrated tool. It has direct links both into Replicon as well as into SharePoint, and can even be used to import various different Excel spreadsheets into tables. So from there, very powerful to get all of our reporting capabilities done. And with all that integration and automation, things refresh on a regular basis. And more importantly, it's very efficient. We don't spend extra resources or hours trying to manage the data in multiple systems.
So you're talking a lot about some really cool, or I should say some very powerful tool sets, right? I mean, I've messed around with Power BI and I've just scratched the surface, and there's so much you can do. So having the right resource to understand how to get the most value out of these tool sets seems extremely important. So let's talk a little bit about the people that make all of this work. Ron, can you kick us off there?
Sure. The short answer is there's a lot, to be perfectly honest. And if you kind of start digging down into those, we look at skill sets. And some of the most important ones are, they kind of extend beyond basic project management. You get into the realms of business analysts, those type of people that can really dig in and understand our customer needs. More importantly, what is that organization's business requirements? Who are the stakeholders? What's really important to them? Some of the other rules are strategists and your financial resources. Strategists are really important when you're looking at someone that has the ability to understand the overall scope of the project. A lot of these projects that we're dealing with or that we're involved in, they're very extensive. They're very intricate. There's a lot of moving parts. So it's very critical that you have somebody that understands all of those moving parts. And you can look at it for, it comes down to anticipating and be able to identify what type of challenges are we going to encounter in these projects before they actually happen, so that we have our solutions readily available, already prepared, and you can bring them to bear as those challenges or obstacles occur. Financial resources, all of these projects have a certain amount of budgetary constraints. They may be CapEx, they may be OpEx, but it's a critical resource to be able to identify what type of financial reporting is really required within these organizations or a specific project. From there, we've got our, the obvious ones, your program manager and project managers. Program manager, just strictly due to the scale and the scope of a lot of these projects, it's really critical for someone that can separate themselves from the day-to-day activities, be a little more strategic, and focus on the leadership teams, the stakeholders, satisfaction, as well as just really focusing on communication and risk management, making sure that anything that potentially becomes in jeopardy or may put the project at risk, that they get identified and addressed and resolved in a timely manner. Project managers, they basically own all of those day-to-day task, resources, and communication type activities. A couple that may be lesser known or lesser thought about is your technical and engineering resources. We're largely dealing with IT and/or security related projects. There's always the need for that technical engineering input or design, or, it might be config validations. The security expertise, this kind of falls into the area of when you're dealing with IT and security, you always have frameworks that apply. These potentially could be NIST 853, other versions of NIST. You have control identifications, and in some cases you have regulatory type compliances that impact these projects. And if they are overlooked or not addressed, it can really throw some serious delays into those projects. And then last but not least, we have technical writing type skills. If you're dealing with large volumes of documentation, if you have system security plans, you have to address POAMs and artifacts. That's where those technical writing skills come in.
Wow, it's a lot of people. So Mark, you've had to build a lot of these teams, obviously inside of SynerComm. What type of people are you looking for? So let's just say I'm a CISO and I'm looking to build a team that can handle this type of project management, or these types of projects, I should say. What are some of the attributes that you're looking for?
Yeah, great question. I think, as you can tell, Ron, just from everything you relayed there on the different groups, obviously, for starters, you have to have a background and some training in those particular areas. That only gets you so far, and that's true, I think, of any role anywhere. If you're just doing what you've been trained to do, you're not adding much more value other than what would be expected. For projects, especially the kinds of complex, intricate projects, Ron, that you mentioned, you've got to have innovation. So any resource in any of these roles, in some cases, it might be one resource blending a few of these together. You've got to be innovative. You've got to be able to think not just what is the one solution that works, and so that's what you're going to go with. When you're demonstrating innovation, you are showing that you're processing, you're listening at least twice as much as you're talking. You're understanding and processing what's happening around you, and then you're doing research and thinking about what else could work in this particular situation. What is really the need versus maybe what's just been asked, and then address the need, find ways to really solve that problem. Innovation is critical, and it seems so simple and it seems so obvious, and yet it can be difficult to find in people. We all like sometimes the quick answer, and that might not always be there. Critical thinking goes hand in hand with innovation, another major attribute. With critical thinking, it's similar to innovation, certainly, but that is you looking for more information from more areas, looking for the patterns, looking for what's interconnecting with what. How can you align strategy with your program, with your project? What are some of the bigger issues that might be at play here? If you're just looking through a small lens and you're trying to solve the problem with a little bit of information, you're not going to solve the right problem. So by expansive thinking, by thinking critically about other areas that are related, you can definitely drive forward a more effective solution. And finally, team orientation. Individual contributions are extremely important, but you can't solve these major problems by yourself. It takes a team, it takes collaboration, it takes applying that innovation and critical thinking with others together, doing it on your own, of course, but working with the team and amplifying your ability to get things done.
So what advice would you give a hiring manager in how to test for some of these attributes?
Yeah, testing is definitely a challenge. This is not a multiple choice test to find the answers and whether or not someone really works here. As we're looking for people to fill these roles, of course, we'll ask questions. We'll look for specific scenarios. We'll seek examples of where they've actually done whatever it is we might be asking. We look for those answers to come in that STAR format. Tell us about a real situation you've been in. What were you tasked with, or what did you task yourself with? what actions did you take and what were the results? And when you ask that, a lot of our candidates will, early in the process, they'll be in what I call they're in the woods. They'll tell us what they would do in those scenarios, what usually happens in those scenarios. And if we can't get to specific examples, that's usually a pretty good indicator that maybe they're not quite there yet. They need a little more help. And where we get people that do move past that, and we need to be a little bit more interesting with them, probably we'll do a little role playing, of course. We'll go through scenarios. We'll see what they might do, scenarios that we come across. But then as we get progressed a little further through that process, we'll do a little unexpected real world collaboration, commiseration. We may come into a room suggesting that we're facing this real challenge. Maybe we're even showing a little bit of emotion and that it's really upsetting us for whatever reason. And then we'll see how that candidate works with us. Do they start asking us questions? Are they seeking to understand? Are they looking to just tell us what they think we want to hear? And that can be a powerful tool in that final stage to really narrow down the people that you think can fit in these roles.
All right, so let's look at the other side of that. Over the years, what are some red flags to look out for?
Yeah, jumping right into solutions, asking a question, and automatically the candidate knows the answer. And it may not be a question that has just such a clear-cut answer. So that just talking immediately solutions before asking questions. When we're talking or looking for when we're interviewing a candidate, sometimes they'll fall back on, and we want them to, of course, tell us what you've done. But based on what they tell us, a lot of times we can get a feel on what they've told us on how they think. If maybe they're not problem solving for us right here in this meeting, in this interview, but when we start asking for those examples, it'll be pretty clear to us that we're looking for team building or orientation. We're looking for innovation. And what we're getting is just a technical solution or what everybody and anybody might answer to solve that problem. Especially with project managers, as Ron pointed out, that's a critical aspect, of course, of program and project management. When we come across project managers who they fall back on their project management training or certification, they're throwing terms around, they're playing with what would usually what you might assume would work in a scenario, but they don't really get deep. We don't really talk solutions. We just talk technical terminology. That's a red flag. And then I don't know, Ron, is there anything that you might add, especially as it relates back to those project managers? Some of the red flags that you've seen?
Yeah, I think I've got one red flag that just kind of continually comes to mind. It's not limited to just strictly project managers, but it's any of the resources we would bring to bear on a given project, and that's individuals that don't have the ability to listen. You know, in our whole approach is to get a better understanding of how to serve that customer and how to solve the problem. And to be honest, you can't get there if you spend 90% of the time talking. You need to spend 90% of the time listening. And the other couple things I'll add, these were just my positive attributes to think about or that come to mind, is just flexibility and just an overall willingness to adapt. Because no two projects are exactly the same. No two customers are the same. No two approaches are the same. Just that person who is highly flexible, highly accommodating, and willing to think outside the box, extremely helpful.
It's a binary thinking, right, Ron? That becomes a big challenge, a big red flag. Black and white, either you're right or you're wrong. And very seldom do we find ourselves in situations where the answer is so obvious.
Agreed.
So that's got me thinking about, I know you guys work with a lot of companies, some very large companies also. And I would have guessed that those larger companies have project management departments,
Yep.
right? So I guess my question is, where would the typical project management department fall short? Obviously, you guys fit into the puzzle somewhere.
Yeah, so we can most of the kind of those large organizations that have their dedicated project management teams, the ones that we've come across, they're almost highly specialized. So there's a lot of activities that fall outside of that specialization that are really, really critical to the success of the overall project. And we can touch on a couple of those where, it kind of all starts with a business need. There's always some underlying reason why that project exists. And a lot of time being able to understand and communicate why the organization is pursuing this project, or in a case where a lot of times the buy-in is fragmented. The way organizations are set up with silos, you may get a decision on the priority or importance of a given project in one silo. It hasn't been communicated to other silos that are going to have an active role in these projects. So really that business need, being able to understand the whys, communicating and making sure that you have that buy-in across the organization, that's one potential issue that we run across. A couple of the other ones all fall into what I would say kind of the technical processes. With IT and security, a lot of times these are solution or hardware-based projects. And when it comes to things like solution identification, evaluation, selection, those are extremely technical in nature and are usually very heavily technically oriented with the resources involved in that decision-making process. That typically falls outside of the standard PM team or project management organization. If you dig a little deeper into those technical processes, you have deployment activities, activation, acceptance testing, and ultimately once it's deployed, you have some sort of service or customer or application migration. The technical people know how to get it done, but a lot of times you have those technical resources have time constraints. And it's very challenging for those resources to take the time to clearly articulate or educate non-technical people in what's really involved in those processes, in those activities. And when you're talking projects, it eventually gets down to timeframes. And the PM resources that you typically encounter, they're not familiar with those processes. They're not familiar with the technical requirements. And to be honest, they really don't know what questions to ask or where to start. So kind of right off the bat, they're kind of behind the 8 ball when it comes to identifying tasks and putting appropriate schedules together. The other component we touched on a little earlier, this all ties to security. In the past, you would get a lot of network activities and projects, and they would be, designed, deployed, completed without an emphasis or a thought to what impact does this have on security. You have system security plans that are impacted. You have controls that need to be considered and addressed. You have artifacts throughout these projects that need to be gathered. And, at the end, you potentially have some sort of compliance impact that, whether it's through an audit or an assessment, you're going to have to prove that throughout the course of this project, you took security controls and compliancy into account. And what you find a lot of times is that's a critical missing component with a lot of projects. And then your auditors come in, your assessors come in, and now you've got a very short interval to go back and retrace your steps, gather your detail and your artifact to prove you did what you did in a manner that you were supposed to stay in compliance and with those security in mind. Probably I've got two left to kind of mention, and one of those all comes down to resources. The one consistency that you have with resources with a lot of our customers is there's never enough. There's a heavy amount of turnover in the IT and security space. A lot of times these resources are backfilled or filled with contractors. So, we've had projects where we've lost, your CISO in a given organization is left. That creates a leadership void and a directive type void. You get a lot of contracts or contractors whose contracts are not renewed, or they get moved from one project to another. Those are examples of where some teams fall short. And the other big one that comes to mind, and we've touched on this in a couple cases, is just the overall risk management. A lot of times project plans get put together, you identify your tasks and your schedule, but there is no clear-cut way when things become in jeopardy, or you identify gaps or risks. Now that they're identified, what is the process or what is the appropriate level to take those issues to, so they get the attention they need and they get resolved timely so that the project stays on track.
Yeah, Ron, I might add there that with what you described and what we see often, Chris, project management offices they're staffed with project managers. They've been trained in project management. They probably come from other backgrounds. They may have finance and accounting and other capabilities, but technical project management is a little bit different. Commonly, PMOs lack that technical capability. And that doesn't mean fingers on the keyboard, executing or implementing something. A lot of times that just means, what is your experience in that area? How can you relate? How can you think critically just think of all the information that's got to come in. There's so much in IT, there's so much in security, way too much for someone to just one individual to absorb all of. So it does take a team to drive it all forward. And it takes that technically savvy project manager to really help drive these technical and technology-oriented, security-oriented, information assurance-oriented projects. You mentioned earlier, Chris, the implement IT, where we do logistics and we're driving large-scale projects over broad geographies. If you don't have the background technically in those areas, you really struggle and you need help from others to drive that forward. A lot of organizations expect that kind of capability, however, from their PMOs. They expect that they're going to have that technical savviness when they don't necessarily. So it's important with that project manager to listen and understand the needs that are coming out. And you need that technical savviness. You need that experience to be able to process that. And if you're going to apply an appropriate solution and not just some solution, something that's right size, that's not just putting in new tools or making decisions that will ultimately cost more, having that background, be able to listen and understand before you just start prescribing what needs to be done. Huge trait that we love to see in a major capability of project managers that we look to drive. You got to collaborate. If you're gonna get the information, you have to work with people. If you can talk the talk, if you can, to an extent, walk the walk with the people that you're working with, you gain credibility, you gain that respect, and that the person you're working with doesn't then feel like their time is wasted. Everything they just mentioned will be forgotten or lost in one ear and out the other. That good background, that technical savviness helps to drive that forward. You can actually listen, you can process, you can restate and model and demonstrate and show that you understand. And that goes a long way to building buy-in and growing that alignment between the various levels of the organization. Ron mentioned risks and issues and risk management. Easy to say, very, very hard to do. If you're not fully aware, if you can't wrap your hands around, your mind around the problem, the risk, the issue that's coming around, all you can do is rely on other people to tell you what should be done and how can you possibly begin to process it. Anybody could, given the time, given the investment, but you don't have time typically to make that happen. The time doesn't permit. So having that good technical savviness that's reinforced with managerial capabilities, you've got experience managing in operations, managing organizations, managing product development and the like. All those skills are technical skills that come back and benefit the project manager. For our clients, we'll offer options that bring to bear where we have technical project managers. We can also bring to bear other capabilities within the organization. And having good, strong technical project management means you've got people that can work with that help that's coming in and can maximize the value of the help that's being provided.
So I've mentioned this in other episodes about some of the awards that you guys have won around security. And so I guess my question is why would, as a security company, why are you offering this service?
Just in quick summary with everything else we've talked about, I think it all comes together and we can clarify and we can translate wants into what the actual needs happen to be. When you don't know what you don't know, when there are black swans floating around everywhere, you don't even know they exist, we can come in and help point those out, help identify, be a value-added information source for you, if nothing else, help you at least lay out your path a little better. Here's what you're asking for. We process all of that. We help the customer work through that. And what we end up with in the end is a solution that meets needs, not just what the ask was. We can maximize those successful outcomes, again, applying all those traits that we've talked about. There's a lot that goes into it. None of the projects that we work on, I should say very, very few of the projects that we work on are straightforward. They're all complex. As Ron mentioned, they're all intricate. There are a lot of moving parts. How can you ensure a successful outcome? Well, you need that alignment. You have to make sure that strategy is aligned with your program, with your project. You have to make sure your projects are developing and are being executed and conducted in such a way that they have a vision of the operation that's to follow. Projects are finite, they end, and you're left with a product, you're left with a result. That product might be a process or a procedure or a tool. It's going to have to be operated. We think through that from beginning to end with that alignment. We help our customers think through that and we drive it. We're more interactive. We find often that before we get involved, there's that lack of communication. We help facilitate that communication, that collaboration. We get the highest and best use out of the capabilities that our customers already have by taking advantage of what we can see in the customers or capabilities that maybe they don't see in themselves and driving that forward. And then sometimes you just have to get it done. Sometimes you just need to spend less time thinking about it and struggling with it and trying to reinvent the wheel. And you just need to take advantage of experience and capability that can drive all of that forward. And so that's why SynerComm got into project management. We, of course, experience that with almost all of the services that we deliver. So we have project management ingrained in all of the services that we otherwise offer. As a service unto itself, we take advantage of all that capability, that everything we've talked about here so far today, bring that together in a service so that our customers can get the same benefit from it that we've otherwise reaped in the past and continue to today.
So Ron, what are some of the pitfalls organizations fall into when it relates to these projects?
So there's probably several common ones that we encounter. And as Mark mentioned earlier, a lot of these projects or engagements that we get involved in, a given organization or a customer has already at least attempted this particular project once, maybe 2 or 3 times. And one of the common threads is right off the bat, where when you think of planning and organization around the project. There's consistently a lack of clear organization, mostly around the scope of the project. Just having that scope clearly defined, communicated, and understood. And kind of the second component of that is you get your scope and objectives. And, you know, the other components of that are, you know, we just kind of call them the big three. You get cost, quality, and schedule. They all work together. If you have to compress your schedule or your timeline, something's going to suffer. Is that going to be your costs are going to go up or your quality is going to go down? There's a direct link between those. And you can kind of start seeing where this is going is if you don't have that planning and organization and scheduling up front, then you kind of run into resources as they complete tasks. Are they completing tasks according to the schedule? Are they just completing tasks because they know they need to get done? Are they completing tasks because they just believe they need to get done? So in a lot of cases, you come across projects where the low priority items are done or the low priority items are getting addressed, but really the things that are supposed to be thought about and or completed or those things that really need the significant amount of time, they're sitting on a back burner somewhere because they're the complicated ones. The other component that we run across or the other pitfall that is common is, you know, if you talk about individuals, effort, and communication. If you are not communicating clearly to those critical team members, you know, they may be focused on one of their specific items and they lose sight of what's the team goal or what's the overall project. Lastly, if you can recall kind of those three things that we just talked through, what is the end result? You have a project that is behind, likely in jeopardy, depending on exposure, could be getting a lot of negativity surrounding that particular project. That leads to highly frustrated team members. You're going to get potential finger pointing across different departments or organizations. And one of Mark's favorite acronyms, which is FUD. You basically get fear, uncertainty, and doubts. And that basically ties back to, at that point, you have a project that's failure or that's failing. And a lot of times that's when SynerComm is brought in.
All right, so we've covered a lot here. I want to keep moving, but one question I have after digesting all of this information is, how do I measure this? What are the measurements of success?
I'll take that one, I think, Chris. And there's no one right way to measure, but it's always right to measure. The old adage that if you can't measure it, you can't can't manage it is more true in projects than anywhere. So for that alignment to be effective, you've got to be able to identify what it is you're going to be measuring. You've got to identify what kind of goals and targets you've got as you're planning your strategy, as you're converting that strategy into a program, as you're building your projects within that program and planning your operations. How does everything align? What are the measures that you need to look for? So we're always establishing from the very beginning metrics. We'll do modeling with our customers. We'll identify a current state and a future state, and we'll try to quantify that for them. We'll set that up in such a way with our model where here's where you are, but if these things change, which we'd expect to see change over time as a result of the product of this project work that we're about to engage in, here's where you should expect to be. Here's a new number. That number can be subjective. It doesn't have to be naturally objective, but there will be objective numbers. Maybe it's financial metrics that we're looking at, can be something that is pretty clear cut. But where that doesn't exist, you have to come up with something so that you have a goal to shoot for and you can see how you're progressing. So with our measurements, we're always measuring on progress in such a way that it's demonstratable, it's trackable, it can be presented, and it can be easily understood. It's so important, especially as projects start to experience, and almost every project at one point or another will suffer some FUD. There will be people that worry that maybe the project's not working like it should. Having metrics, having indicators, having measures that you can show, especially as it relates back to progress during those phases where outcomes aren't being very effectively measured yet. You're not yet realizing the benefit of the outcome. Your measures aren't changing there. But to show that you're progressing toward what you would expect will drive those outcomes, critical. And that's what boards of directors, that's what executive leadership teams, they want to, they like to, and they frankly need to be able to see that rather than sitting in a session like this and listening to people like Ron and I talking ad nauseum about all the minutia that could be out there. It's got to be boiled down. It's got to be bubbled up to something that is easily understood and can be used to set direction.
Well, I want to be sensitive to your time, but I've got to ask, I think we should talk about some use cases here. What are some of the significant challenges that made each project unique, and how did you guys solve that problem?
Sure, I'll start with a quick one, but I think kind of all encompassing in the things that we've talked about here today. We had a customer, they'd been purchasing security control solutions from us, some miscellaneous services here and there. It was a multinational manufacturing company that got a contract with the federal government. They believed themselves to be a very secure company, and they had a lot of controls that indicated that they probably were pretty secure. When they went through a NIST audit, the results weren't so great. What leadership thought was secure, what technology resources thought was secure, what the business thought was secure, they were all different and totally misaligned. When they had a framework to work from, in this particular case, NIST, it was clear what they were lacking. They had a major list of gaps. That's when they needed help from us. Now that they had the gaps done, they could see what was missing. They were left with hundreds and hundreds of tasks that had to be completed in order for them just to comply, not even let alone become more secure, just to comply with what they were required to comply with. So we worked with them to convert those hundreds of tasks into maybe 20 initiatives in a plan of action and milestones. Every one of those tasks in the NIST world is called a POAM, but creating more of a strategic level POAM that sets initiatives up that everything can be wrapped into means now we can create measures. Now we can start to plan what the effort will be. What would it actually take? We can quantify initiatives. We can drive that forward. We did that with this customer and now had a plan of action and milestones. We brought in program management, having helped develop the strategy together with the customer. We transitioned smoothly into program management to take all those initiatives and turn those into at least a list of individual projects that needed to be accomplished. Some projects, some just do it items, things that just had to get done. We don't need heavy duty project management. We just need to make that thing happen, whatever it needed to be. And in that case, they had a few of the 20 items. There were probably 3 that just could be done, but still needed to be tracked, still needed to be tied back to the control set that they were audited against so we could see how they were progressing and addressing the control gaps. From there, we worked with them. Now that we had a program in place, we helped justify that program, quantify the program, set measures in place for how the program would be considered successful, collaborated. We weren't 100% right, of course, on the first round as we went through multiple rounds of setting that up. We came to something that had good alignment from the top and the middle of the organization. Then we drove projects with project charters, making sure that those projects were approved and justified. They were budgeted, they were appropriated for the funds that we needed, and capital and operating expense, well, maybe just in people. We could get that working. We took them through that process. managed that whole program then through all those projects, multiple project managers reporting back through the program, serving as project managers as well in that environment. And ultimately getting those projects done to a point where we were able to report back that the controls were put in place, were able to address the needs that they had, what the gaps, and as a result, they were able to achieve their authority to operate. They got approval to work with this federal government data. Their controls were in place, but they weren't done. They still needed to mature. So that's where we continue to engage with them, aligned with everything from the strategy through the program, through the project. And we made sure that as they operated now, these new controls, these new systems, these new processes, that it's a plan, do, check, act process. You've built it. Now you have to validate it and make sure it's actually working like you expected it to work. We've helped them through that process. As a result, we've created then subsequent POAM Part 2s that were following that same process, then just cycling back through and driving for them continuous improvement. So they met their needs. They were able to deliver the service, the solution that they offered to a federal government agency. And then on an ongoing basis, what they found is that because of putting those solutions in place, following the metrics, understanding what the vision was, understanding what the goals were, measuring it and shining light on it, gave them the ability to continuously improve their maturity and actually not just check boxes, but continually become more and more secure as an organization.
Ron, anything to add there?
Sure, I've got kind of a combination use case that I want to share. And it really, when we look at a lot of the challenges that we've talked through, some of the pitfalls that we've talked through, I think this one really encompasses quite a few of those challenges, as well as some of the SynerComm specific approaches that Mark alluded to. It has direct ties to that. So I think it's a good one to touch base on. So what we're talking about here is a couple organizations that are in the healthcare space, mostly service providers. And one of these organizations, their projects were, they were tied to your state and local government. And one of the other customers, they were tied to the federal government. And when I say tied, they needed to either obtain or maintain their authority to operate status with either the state local government or the federal government. And when we look at some of the consistencies or the challenges that both of these organizations had, much to like Mark talked about in his, when these organizations started, they had a very limited understanding of security framework and even potentially what compliancy really meant. So before we could even get the projects kicked off and the organization to understand the scope of these projects and how involved it was really going to be, we had to identify what framework applied. In most of these cases, fortunately, it was NIST. So we started with, disseminating information on NIST. You're looking at the control framework. It's potentially 350 controls. There's a lot to get your hands wrapped around, especially if you're thinking you need to get an understanding of that before you can get the project moving. So we kind of started with that challenge. Like most organizations, they were very resource constrained. And without a lot of understanding of security, why it's important, compliancy, it was very hard for the technical sides of the house to really kind of take a step away from all of their normal day-to-day application technical responsibilities to be able to put forth that amount of hours and that effort into being able to identify, assess, and provide the detail and the artifacts necessary to support NIST controls or NIST compliancy. We always had transitioning resources. None of these engagements or projects were short-term. It's very challenging for organizations to allocate resources to a project that's 6 to 12 to 24 months in duration. And you may get resources assigned for 3 months, and then they have to roll off. And then you have to kind of onboard and retrain somebody else. When resources leave the organization, in one case we mentioned, a CISO had transitioned out of the organization mid-project. That takes a lot of legacy knowledge and leadership skills directly with that individual. Those are challenges. I think Mark touched on this one, but a lot of times, if you don't have a mature organization, they don't have the systems or the data gathering processes in place to be able to address a NIST control set, a system security plan, even down to POAMs. And the other challenge that's kind of consistent is the intervals are always short. We never have 12 or 24 months to complete these projects. It's always, okay, we knew we had to do it, but now it's 90 days or, 120 days out. So you're always dealing with those very compressed timeframes. So those are kind of the challenges and the pitfalls that we seem to find consistently in this case. You can take a little bit of what Mark's talked about as far as our unique approach. You get a large volume of not only security expertise, but also technical expertise that was brought to bear for these particular projects. And some of the other missing components were the business and the operational understanding and management. So those were kind of two keys from a resource standpoint that we were able to bring to the project. Then when you kind of look at what did we actually do to get these projects back on track, how did we get them to successful completion? The first step sounds really easy. We got it organized. So the bigger question is, how did we manage that? Mark gave a lot of detail, and when we go to our modeling process, that was really step one with these engagements. We used a modeling approach to really dig deep and get a really good understanding of where the project was, what the scope was, and what kind of the objectives and the deliverables need to be, and more importantly, who the stakeholders are. So from there, communication was extremely poor. So we had to improve and fix the various lines of communication, not necessarily with the people that were doing the day-to-day work, but all the way up the line to the leadership and the executives that were very frustrated because all they saw were the rapidly approaching due dates, but they had no clear-cut understanding of where are we in being able to meet that date. So we had to address that. How did we do it? Other than kind of looking at the modeling, we talked extensively about our tool sets. That was very instrumental once we understood what we needed to do, getting all of that data into our standardized tool set. Be able to get the data gathering, the data capturing, getting the scheduling complete, and more importantly, getting the reporting out there that gave the organizations that level of comfort of, okay, here's what the next 3 months look like. Here's what the next 6 months look like. And as we got going, they were able to look back, okay, these are the accomplishments over the last 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days. Then they had the ability to have an accurate set of reports that could kind of prove or disprove how close they are to meeting the due dates, and basically to be able to maintain ATO. If you don't have that authority to operate, you jeopardize your potential ability to offer services in those states or those markets, which is a situation nobody wanted to be in. So last but not least, through the approach, through the tools and the resources that we brought to the project, the end result for all of these were the ATOs were either maintained or obtained. And since in a lot of these cases, when we're initially engaged, we've talked about, the processes in the system or the knowledge may be lacking. So one of the things I think that's unique to what we do is when our engagements conclude, we don't take all that legacy knowledge with us. Over the course of our engagement, we spend time with knowledge transfer and either providing the guidance or the tools that these organizations need so that they can support a quality security program, whether we are there to assist them or not.
Gentlemen, I appreciate all of your time. You have been watching to SynerComm's IT Trendsetters. This is episode 6, Information Technology Strategy, Program, and Project Management when aligning and operationalizing your information security program. Thank you, and until next time.